Namaste. We continue with our series in psychoanalysis on the triad of thought, affect, and behavior. In our last episode, we talked about thought. In this episode, we'll discuss about affect. And in our next episode, we'll discuss about behavior. For this, we have with us our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Sir, can we begin with our first question? How do we define affect?
As human beings, we experience something which is called thought and something which is called a feeling. We experience thoughts in terms of the activity of knowing or the activity of thinking. So when we are doing these things, we experience something which we call a thought. While we experience something else like happiness or sadness, which we call as a feeling. And these two are very distinct entities. As human beings, we experience an entity called a thought and an entity called feeling. And we know by direct experience that these two are different entities. For example, let us say you have been to Disneyland last year and you had undertaken that roller coaster ride. Today, when you recollect of it, two things happen. The idea that you had been to Disneyland comes back to you, and the feeling of thrill that you experienced while you were on the roller coaster, that feeling also comes back to you. And by direct experience, all of us know that the mere cognitive or thought memory is different and the feeling memory is different. You can recollect of that incident without feeling also, and you can recollect that incident with feeling also. Now, when you recollect that incident with feeling, you re-experience the feeling of thrill. And if you recollect without that experience of thrill, you only recollect in ideational or thought terms. Therefore, thought as an entity is different, feeling as an entity is different. Thought is an entity that we experience in the process of knowing or in the process of thinking, whereas feeling is an entity which we experience when we undergo this distinct process of feeling inside of us. And this basket of thoughts and the basket of feelings is different. When we look at thoughts, thoughts are of different types. You can have a seed thought, you can have a fully developed idea, you can have an imaginary thought, you can have a practical thought, you can have a useful thought, you can have a useless thought, you can have a reduced thought, you can have an induced thought. All different kinds of thoughts exist. So there is a basket full of thoughts. Similarly, you also have a basket full of feelings. You have anger, fear, pain, guilt, shame, happiness, ecstasy, bliss. All these are different kinds of feelings. So we have a basket full of thoughts and basket full of feelings. Affect is a technical name for feelings. And we will see what is the difference between the two words, affect and feeling, as we go along. But affect is a term which is used to capture the word feeling. So in psychology, we say thought, affect, and behavior, these three are the large entities which we deal with in psychology for most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. Now, when we look at human beings as a race, most of us are very comfortable with thought and behavior. Very few of us are comfortable with feelings. And if we look at the Industrial Revolution and the advent of what we call modernity, modernity is a very pro-thought, pro-behavior construct. And it is almost an anti-feeling, anti-intuition, anti-spirituality kind of a construct. And this construct has taken hold of minds of people for the last 300 years, about 300 years. Therefore, today we are in a situation where we have a Nobel Prize for good thinking. We have equivalent prizes for good behavior, but we don't have any prize for good feelings. So the human civilization as a whole, in the last 300, 350 years, has become a very pro-thought, pro-behavior civilization, which was not true before. It is just our inability to take a historical view long enough that makes us feel as though thought and behavior are more important and feelings are less important. But if we go long back in time, we see feelings also are equally important or more important. So in the last 50 years, slowly the primacy of feelings is coming back. So psychoanalysis brought back the primacy of feelings about 100, 110 years back. But the real upsurge in the significance of feelings in psychotherapy in particular, that has been around for the last 50 years and even more so in the last 25 years. In the last 25 years, particularly in psychotherapy, we have seen a much enhanced prestige given to this entity called the affect or feeling.
What is the significance of affect in psychology and psychoanalysis?
Let me first clear another point before we go there. The difference between feeling and affect. Because psychoanalysis uses the word affect and not feeling. So let us first clear that part. First, feeling is something that we feel consciously. So I say I feel happy, I feel sad, I feel guilty, I feel ashamed, I feel ecstatic, I feel depressed. So what I can feel consciously, I call that feeling. However, psychoanalysis tells us that at an unconscious level also, we have an unconscious mind, and at that unconscious level also, the unconscious mind has thoughts and feelings. So the unconscious mind has creativity, autonomy, and desire, as well as morality. So all that happens in the conscious mind also happens in the unconscious mind. And in the unconscious mind also, feelings are generated. Now, these feelings are not felt by us because we don't know, we are not conscious about it. So, if we want to put both of them together, the conscious feelings and the unconscious feelings, we use the word affect. But when we want to use only the conscious feelings, which we feel consciously, then we use the word feeling.
Okay.
Some people use the word emotion as a synonym of affect. But some people use the word emotion as a synonym of feelings.
Right.
So it all depends upon definitions. It's a definitional problem. Words will take meanings based upon how you define them. But the generic logic is this. There is a feeling that we feel consciously, and there are feelings which are unconscious. The conscious feelings we call as feelings, and the unconscious feelings, if we want to capture them, we use the word either unconscious feelings or we use the word affect. The word affect covers both the conscious feelings as well as the unconscious feelings. And therefore, psychoanalysis uses the word affect rather than the word feelings.
Okay.
Because we want to capture feelings at conscious and unconscious levels both. So this is the difference between them. Now coming to how psychology and psychoanalysis view it. Is it the question, I believe?
Yeah. What is the significance of affect in psychology and psychoanalysis?
Yes, yes. Now, in psychology, the significance till recently was very low because psychology was obsessed with thought and behavior.
Okay.
And this had a precedence. Psychology came out of philosophy only about 200 years ago or 250 years ago, roughly around that time, in the Western civilization, in the university system. And philosophy was predominantly uh, related to thoughts. So psychology, and it came out as an independent discipline. It had that heritage or the baggage, whatever you want to call it, of being heavily saddled with the idea of thoughts. In the second phase of psychology began when psychology wanted to be respected as an exact science, almost like physics and chemistry. In order to do that, it started focusing on behavior because that was the only directly observable thing. So there can be confusion related to thoughts and feelings, but behavior is quite an objective thing. So the behavior can be made objective. It can also be measured. So something which was indisputable, observable, and measurable, that could give psychology the respect of an exact science. And this brought about an obsession with behavior. Psychology also was a product of modernity, and modernity is obsessed with behavior and thoughts, not with feelings. That trend continued in psychology in general, except for psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis, like psychology, also is a construct of modernity, except for some Jungian theories. But on the point of affect, psychoanalysis took quite a contrary position. Psychoanalysis gave primacy to affect over thought. And psychoanalysis did not believe what many cognitive psychotherapies like CT and CBT believed, that thought leads to feelings, leads to behavior. This premise of CBT was something psychoanalysis did not believe in, because psychoanalysis thought, even today it believes so, that it is not necessary that thought leads to feeling, leads to behavior. You can easily see situations where feelings lead to thoughts, lead to behavior. And behavioral therapy tells us you can have behavior leading to feelings, leading to thoughts. So actually it's a three-way traffic.
Right.
The belief that thought leads to feelings, leads to behavior, the belief that this is the only correct way is not actually true. It's a very fanatical position held by the adherents of CT or CBT. Actually, it's a three-way traffic. And psychoanalysis focused upon the traffic from affect to thoughts, just as CBT focused on the traffic from thoughts to affect. And behavioral therapy focused upon the traffic from behavior to feelings or behavior to thoughts. And uh, therefore, although psychoanalysis believed more in affect and less in thought, in a comparative sense, although both were used, uh, the primacy of affect was still not central in psychology uh, till about 50 years back. And we will see slightly later what new developments have happened as slowly the primacy of affect started taking the center stage. So for psychology, the primacy of affect or the significance of affect is a very late development, last 50 years. But for psychoanalysis, it has always been so. Affect was always more significant than thought, right from the inception.
How do art, philosophy, and spirituality engage with affect?
Very differently. Art and philosophy are at two ends of the spectrum. Philosophy is all thought and almost no feelings. Art is much of the feelings and almost no thought. I would not say no thought, but very less thought. So art is predominantly feelings and very less thought. Philosophy is predominantly thought and very less feelings. Spirituality is a different entity altogether. Spirituality incorporates both the spirit of philosophy and the spirit of art at the service of self-knowing and self-development. And spirituality uses affect in a very significant way in three broad routes or highways, so to say. One, spirituality uses affect first for self-purification. So negative affect which has been stored up has to be released. That's a very important part of spirituality, also an important part of psychotherapy. But for the present discussion, spirituality has this very important element of what in Sanskrit is called Bhuta Shuddhi, or purification of the basic elements that constitute us. And the elements that constitute us include the physical body, our thoughts, and our emotions. And all the three, they require purification. So for spirituality, the first engagement with emotions or affect is purification of negative affect. The second important aspect for spirituality and psychotherapy both is how to prevent generation of new negative affect. Because if we purify the past and the generator still is there, again the buckets will be full. So we not only want to empty the buckets, we want to switch off the generator. So second element is how to switch off the generator that is generating negative affect. Third important element is on the positive side, how to use affect for self-development. And this is very important, and therefore there is an entire way of spirituality called the Bhakti Yoga, which predominantly uses emotions for self-development. And then spirituality also uses tools. So there is a very big area of spirituality, how to develop tools for purifying affect, removing negative affect, increasing the positive affect, and switching on the generator of the negative affect. For this, a variety of tools are used. It may be mantra, it may be idol therapy, it may be visualization, it may be singing, music, variety of practices are used. So for spirituality, affect is not something to be away from. Spirituality engages with affect. Spirituality also engages with thought equally. And therefore, we see two different routes for self-development. One is Gyan Marga, which is predominantly based upon use of thought, and the Bhakti Marga, which is predominantly based upon the use of affect. So in spiritual and behavior also, the Karma Marga is the behavioral marga. So spirituality uses all the three, thought, affect, and behavior in combinations, and a different basket is created for each person. So spirituality engages with affect in a quite different way than art or philosophy does. For philosophy, it engages minimal with affect, and when it engages, it is more like analyzing of it. In art, the engagement with thought is minimal, but the affect engagement primarily is for enjoyment, self-expression, or creative imagination. It does not really have much of applied value. Whereas in spirituality, the engagement with thought and affect and even behavior is with a very clear purpose of self-knowing and self-development. So spirituality is neither art nor philosophy. It is a very practical, holistic discipline for self-knowing and self-development.
Sir, we are talking about spirituality and affect. In that, the question is affect always experienced vis-a-vis an object, or can it be experienced as pure affect?
Now, on this point, Western psychotherapy and spirituality will have very different viewpoints. In the context of the uh, Western psychotherapy, you cannot experience affect without an object. There is only one exception to this, what Freud talked about the oceanic feeling, the feeling of primary narcissism. So Freud talked about the state of primary narcissism, which was a pre-object state. And all that was felt, all affects which were felt in that pre-object stage essentially were object-free affects. The object world is yet to start. But modern research in psychoanalysis has gone more on the other side. So modern scientific research in psychoanalysis has gone on the side of Klein and not on the side of Freud. So Klein believed that we are all object relations creatures. And right from birth, our mind starts engaging with objects in a psychological sense. In the inner world, objects always are there. And affect always flows towards the object. So from that point of view, which is now the predominant point of view in Western psychotherapy, because of the empirical research which is done on infants, where they have found that very early in life, infants start object relations. And it's difficult to find in video camera, in observation, any infant who is not object related. So the contemporary viewpoint is that we cannot feel affect without an object. But I personally am on the other side. I agree with Freud that there is a state of primary narcissism, which is a pre-object state. Now, whether that state is felt uh, when there is a gap in the object relations phase in the early life, there may not be a clear state that for the first week you have no object. It may be that 1 hour per day you may have no object. Or maybe during sleep or before sleep you have no object. But the fact that we can experience no object states, which is full of awareness and bliss, is so clear, and people so intensely long to go back to those states. And spirituality has a goal of enlightenment, which also has states or goals. The goal state is very near to the state of primary narcissism, not near in the sense of being like it, but there are elements of it. So I personally feel that Freud was right. In some sense, we don't know how and when, but in some sense, we do feel, we do experience affect without object and an object-free state, which Freud calls primary narcissism. That is one part of it. Second part is, so that is one point where we contradict the recent empirical findings, which says that we are always object relating creatures. The second element comes from spiritual experiences. There are spiritual experiences of what is called enlightenment in the East. And this is not one experience, there are varieties of experiences. 4 or 5 different types of experiences which people wrongly label under the same name called enlightenment. So, in fact, we should be having categories of enlightenment, E1, E2, E3, E4, and E5. But that is not the case. Unfortunately, people use the same word for all these things. And all these states, they share some common elements. Like all these states will have substantial freedom from fear, substantial freedom from desires, and ability to get into a state of no thought along with awareness and bliss. But apart from those commonalities, there will be differences in experiences. So we have not really studied the spiritual psychology in adequate details as we should have. But those experiences, well documented and experienced repeatedly by many people who claim to have experienced enlightenment, these experiences very clearly suggest that we can have a state of no thought, and we can also feel object-free affect. We can also have an object-free world. And in my own personal experience, I have experienced both of them. I have experienced an object-free world, and I have experienced an object-free affect. So for me, from a personal experience standpoint also, there is no way I can agree to someone who says that we cannot have an object-free world, we cannot have a state of no thought, we cannot have a state of no feeling, we cannot have a state of feeling without object. I think these are shortcomings of not having certain rare types of experiences, what we call rare spiritual experiences. If we have those experiences, the experiences are so clear that there is no confusion after that. It's not a question. Your experience itself is a conviction. And no amount of theoretical arguments can shake what you have experienced. That's a different level of certainty altogether. So I do feel personally, it is possible to experience object-free affect and to experience object-free world and to have a state of no thought.
So, in that sense, is it possible to experience an affect-free state?
Yes, it is possible to experience an affect-free state. When we go into a state of no thought, usually it is accompanied by awareness and bliss. So bliss is still an affect. Maybe a spiritual affect, a sublime affect, but still an affect. But some people report that in certain conditions, if you persist in that state long enough, you get into a state of pure awareness where even the bliss is not felt. And this brings us to this state of no affect. And there we have to slightly define a new variable. This new variable, we need a new term, but for the present, I am using the term feel. Feel not in the sense of a feeling, but feel in a very generic etymological sense, a very primal sense, that feeling the fact that you exist. Even if you are having no thought and no feelings, there is a very distinct, very unique kind of a feel that you exist. That feel, which is very different from the normal feeling that we talk about. It is the feel of the existence. It is that feel of that pure transparent consciousness, that vanilla ice cream before any color or flavor is added. So
Right.
that 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 feeling of existing, it can never go away, like awareness. It is the part of the most basic part of us. So when we get into the most basic part of us, the consciousness that we say, the most fundamental attributes of that consciousness would be awareness, the feel of existence, and ability to take cognizance and respond to something else. So when responding to something else ceases, the other two are still there. And that is a separate kind of a feel, which is apart from feelings. So in that state also, one does not have the feelings as we usually call the feelings, what we mean by the word feelings, like happiness, sadness, anger, guilt, fear. Those are completely absent in those states. So considering what we usually mean by the word feeling, it is possible to have in these states of no thought and pure awareness uh, a state which does not even have feelings. And in the state of no thought, there is only this feeling of bliss. Otherwise, there are no feelings. Also, in the state of oneness with existence that some people report, again, we don't have uh, very distinct feelings. Some people do report a feeling of bliss, but some people don't report that feeling also. So if that is not felt, then that oneness state can also be a state of no effect. But we have to point out that all these states that we are referring to essentially are rare states. These are not every person's common experiences. These are rare states, just as we use this word altered consciousness.
Right.
So this is an altered state of consciousness, a rare state of consciousness, which is experienced usually only after long spiritual practices.
Uh, After spirituality, we come back to psychotherapy. So, how does psychotherapy engage with affect?
Psychotherapy, when it started with psychoanalysis, affect was at the center. The difficulty with psychoanalysis was we would do catharsis or release of negative affect, blocked up affect, by using the instrument of interpretation. And this tool of interpretation is a blunt tool. It is not a very sharp tool. So the time taken for catharsis and the volume of affect which is released per hour, if you calculate the per hour release of affect, then we are dealing with very blunt tools. We do not know which interpretation will work or not in a particular situation. It is an uncertain open situation. Two, even if it works, it does not release much of the effect. The effect released is very small. So psychoanalysis did work with affect right from the start, but the working was very slow and very unpredictable, given the blunt tools of psychoanalysis. So in psychoanalysis, we had this peculiar situation, which is still today. It's very good in analysis and explanations. But the tools to put that understanding into action are blunt tools. Other part of psychology never put so much of significance to affect. Uh, as we discussed a few minutes before, thought and behavior became the important parts. So much of psychotherapy and psychology was obsessed with thoughts and behavior. It is in the last 50 years that the primacy of affect has come up. And it has come up in many different ways, and many innovative movements in psychotherapy have started. We first had what is called the emotion-centered therapy, which focused on emotions per se and less on thoughts. Then we had psychodrama, and psychodrama was also largely based upon affect, but dealing with it in a very concrete way through a created psychodrama. Almost as though there was one person who was the ego and one person who was the superego. And one could see in a concrete way how the unconscious mind was functioning. Or one person was a child and the second person was a parent, and one could concretely recreate the situation and experience feelings. So psychodrama sort of concretized this whole movement of affect focused healing. And lastly, we have ISTDP, where they videograph the sessions, they video record the sessions, and it clearly tells us how quickly we can move about if we focus on affect instead of thoughts. And my personal feeling is even that process needs some refinement. It needs a lot of sanitization in terms of non-violent communication and lot more holding rather than bare confrontation or at all times. So it is a work in progress, but my feeling is that uh, in times to come, we will have more innovations on affect focused psychotherapy and less innovations on thought focused psychotherapy. But of course, innovations will be there on both the sides. And as we go forward, my personal desire, rather, I should say, my personal wish is that we come out of these silos of thought, feeling, and behavior, bring them together, and create uh, integrated approaches to healing.
How important is it to deal with affect from the standpoint of view of interpersonal and group conflicts?
It is very, very important because affect not expressed has a very strong influence on the quality of life. So if we are all looking at a good quality of life, which we are destined to look at by our very nature of our hardware is such that we all want a better quality of life. It's not an option, it's a given inside. So if we go by that, then we realize that unexpressed affect which is generated but not expressed, has a very strong influence on determining our quality of life. This includes both positive affect and negative affect. More importantly, negative affect, if it is too much inside and not expressed adequately, it results in psychological problems. So a large category of psychological problems are essentially because of repressed negative affect. And a large category of psychosomatic problems, which we are wrongly classifying as somatic problems presently. And this includes many cases, a large number of cases of blood pressure, of migraine, of nausea, of diabetes, of asthma, of eczema. So there is a very large group of sicknesses which at present we call biological, but in fact they are psychological. And most of them are because of too much of repressed negative affect. So at an individual level, it is very important to be in touch with one's affect and express one's affect and empty out the negative affect and switch off those generators which are creating negative affect inside. This is from an individual point of view. From a group point of view, the same thing happens on a larger scale. That if there is too much of negative affect inside, our containing capacity is not adequate. We are not able to successfully repress that negative affect. When we cannot handle our negative affect ourselves, we throw it onto others. And this is the cause of most of the group conflicts. Very few group conflicts actually have an objective cause. Most group conflicts have actually an emotional cause, not a rational cause. And this emotional cause, by and large, is because of the split operating in the unconscious, generating huge amount of negative effect, which cannot be contained and has to be thrown on somebody. So we all need the other to contain our negative effect. We all need someone to hate. If we don't have someone to hate, that effect will come back to us and we can't handle it. So very few people actually can live without an enemy. In a psychotherapeutic sense, enemy is a dear friend. It allows us to remain sane. So when we say be thankful to the enemy, from a psychotherapeutic point of view, it's absolutely true. Now, the difficulty is we are in a group situation when we see we are in a situation where affect creates thoughts. So if we have negative affect and we cannot contain it and we throw it onto some other group, then the mind creates reasons to justify that thing. So we will always find reasons to justify our negative affect thrown on somebody. So that is a situation where thought does not create affect, affect creates thoughts. So if India and Pakistan are enemies of each other, Indians will discover reasons to hate them far more than they deserve. And this will be not only India, Pakistan, it's true about any two groups. Within India also you will have two groups who hate each other. Maybe on the basis of religion or caste or region or language or something. But any group conflict essentially is explosion after a long build-up of group hate and group anger. And this group hate and group anger essentially is projection out from the inside, which we cannot contain ourselves. So that is the reason why, despite there being no rational cause for many conflicts, the conflicts still continue because they are not rooted in reason, they are rooted in emotion. Until that is resolved, people will keep finding reasons how to continue that conflict.
Right.
Because the continuation of the conflict actually is therapeutic. It is a mass psychotherapy going on in a very destructive and dysfunctional way. It is a $1 billion per session kind of psychotherapy.
Right.
Very destructive, very dysfunctional, very costly, but still it is on. And it cannot stop because people don't have the capacity to really hold and manage their own effects. They need the conflict to go on. And therefore, they will pick up any leader who promises that the conflict will go on. So for group conflicts also, this is very important, that how individuals which constitute the group are able to manage their own negative effect. And this gets into three phases, which we'll talk slightly later, of how the effect is generated, how managed, and how excess effect gets into symptoms. But the whole problem is that at a larger scale of society, country, or United Nations, something has to be done to better manage the negative effect so that we can avoid some of the group conflicts.
This is such an important and sensitive point you have raised.
Yes.
Thank you for bringing it up.
Thank
Uh, Sir, you have created your own new model of the mind called the heat model of the mind. So can you tell us how that heat model of the mind engages with affect?
Uh, Two important contributions the heat model of the mind makes to understanding and management of affect. The first is the manufacturing process of the affect. How does affect get manufactured? If we say, I am feeling happy, how did that happiness get manufactured? Before that happiness came into existence, what were the raw materials which were used by some process or by some entity in order to manufacture that happiness? So the manufacturing process of the affect. There is a meta-psychological explanation in that model of the manufacturing process of the affect, and it's a very structural explanation. Second, the heat model goes into the affect life cycle, and this has three parts. How the affect is generated. Once affect is generated, how is it regulated? And if it cannot be regulated, how it gets into a symptom. So if we look at all psychological problems, we will find almost 60 to 70% of them are because of too much of negative affect inside. There may be others which are because of biological issues, medical issues, drugs, accidents, damage to the brain, or just pure genetics, or maybe just wrong thinking or wrong behavioral patterns. But at least I would say almost 50 to 60% will be because of too much of negative affect. And if we take up uh, the chronic sicknesses, long-term sicknesses, I think the percentage will be even larger, where the root is primarily in repressed negative affect. Now, that being so the case, it is very important to go into the life cycle of affect. So from the point affect is born to the grave of the affect, how does the affect move? So we go there into first the generation of affect. So I go in the affect life cycle in three phases: affect generation, affect regulation, and symptom formation. So first is affect generation. The heat model gives you the entities which are involved in affect formation, affect generation. That if we talk of the first phase, what are the issues which are involved in determining how much affect will be generated? Is it only the strength of the stimulus? Is it only the way you process the stimulus? When you process the stimulus, which entities inside of you are active in what way? So there is a detailed explanation of affect generation. Once affect is generated, it has to be regulated. The first thing in regulation is expression. If you express it out, rest of the process is not needed. So if all affect generated can be expressed, the story is over. But if affect generated cannot be completely expressed, then partially it is expressed and partially not expressed. That part which is partially not expressed has to be regulated by defenses. So either you go into sublimation, or you go into repression, or you go into projection, but defenses have to work upon that part which cannot be expressed. So there is this second phase. So first is affect generation, second is affect regulation. After expression, regulation, everything, if excess affect is left completely free, and we are talking about negative affect, then that excess negative affect gets into symptom formation. So the heat model goes into this entire thing in details. And one of the things I can share from that model is this, that two important elements come out at the bottom of the whole analysis. And they are sensitivity and negativity. If the sensitivity is not very high, you will not generate high amount of effect. And if negativity is low, you will not generate high amount of negative effect. It's only when these two combine, high sensitivity and high negativity, that large amount of negative effect is generated. And then it depends upon regulation, whether it can regulate or not regulate. And if it cannot regulate, then of course you have symptom formation. But the root gets into these two things, sensitivity and negativity. And therefore, if you are to work at the very roots in behavioral therapy, psychoanalysis, or even holistic healing, this is the way we can look at the root elemental causes of our psychological difficulties and work upon them.
Now we come to our last question of holistic healing vis-a-vis affect. So how does holistic healing manage affect, and how does it use for the self-development of the person?
Holistic healing gets into two parts: the spiritual self-development of the person and healing of sicknesses. If we look at healing of sicknesses first, holistic healing deals with it in many different ways, not one. Take examples. Acupressure would try to heal something by releasing the affect which is blocked in particular parts of the body. And that release is done by applying physical pressure. So they will work on blocked affect which is blocked at particular points in the body by applying pressure. And they believe if you can move the energy which is involved in the affect will dissipate. So they don't even talk about blocked affect, they talk about blocked energy. Acupuncture does the same thing by puncturing particular points in the body. That, according to them, releases the the blocked energy, and in our language, it also releases the blocked affect. So what they call releasing the blocked energy is, from psychotherapeutic point of view, a catharsis. But they are achieving catharsis by puncturing holes at particular meridians. Acupressure is achieving catharsis by pressing those points. Contrary to that, pranic healing and Reiki, they use certain energies to be given, and they give healing energies to the affected part in order to remove the negative energy. So they remove the negative energy either by cleaning or by giving positive energy, or doing both of them. But they achieve the same catharsis in a very different way by projecting energy into the system. Till now, we were not sure whether these are scientific methods or these are more of mystical adventures. But recent experiments have shown that they indeed are true. They are scientific in a particular sense of the term, although we don't understand them completely. Then we have approaches like homeopathy, which also achieve the same thing, but by giving certain medications, where the quantity of that medicine is very, very low, below the Avogadro's number. And through a particular process of preparation, it is done. And therefore, it stimulates the vital energy to heal ourselves. And that stimulation overcomes the blockage of the energy and affect. So they deal with the repressed negative affect in very different way by giving highly potentialized medications. Then we have physical exercises like Tai Chi or Hatha Yoga. They try to remove the block negative affect by certain physical postures or physical pressures. So Hatha Yoga, Tai Chi, and also what Wilhelm Reich, a psychoanalyst, once developed the method called Rolfing, a particular kind of massage. These were like physical actions which are used to release the block negative affect. So these are some people even use visualization, and some use the tool of mantra, and some use idol therapy, what is popularly called idol worship. Actually, it's idol therapy. So people use all these holistic tools in order to remove the blocked negative effect or to develop the positive effect. So holistic healing has a whole basket of tools and procedures to remove negative effect and increase the positive effect. And this includes a variety of tools that we discussed, along with social work, along with behavioral practices.
Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful discussion on a very delicate subject like affect. Uh, in our next video, we shall talk about behavior. And please, meanwhile, write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Thank you. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.